Asim Munir is once again rattling the nuclear saber, declaring there is no space for war in a nuclearized environment and threatening a decisive, beyond proportions response against India. Yet the facts of 2025 prove India already executed limited, precise conventional operations under the nuclear overhang and compelled a ceasefire on Indian terms during Operation Sindoor, effectively calling Pakistan's nuclear bluff and forcing DGMO to DGMO engagement that halted Pakistani escalation when its leadership reached out to stop further punishment strikes. His latest warnings reprise a familiar pattern: high-octane nuclear rhetoric timed to domestic turbulence, projecting resolve externally while diverting attention internally. But India has repeatedly rejected nuclear blackmail, condemned the threats officially, and underscored the space for calibrated conventional action against cross-border terror infrastructure, precisely what was demonstrated in Sindoor through measured, non-escalatory, time-bound strikes that achieved political military objectives and then locked in a ceasefire through direct military hotlines and official channels. Operation Sindoor was conceived as a focused punitive response after a barbaric terror attack, employing precision air and missile strikes against designated terrorist facilities in Pakistan and Pakistan-occupied territory, with Indian authorities emphasizing strict target discipline to avoid general war while imposing real costs on Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba networks. The operation's design and execution showcased strategic clarity, command cohesion, and escalation control despite Islamabad's retaliatory fire and drone attacks. The operational timeline was short, sharp, and disciplined. Indian strikes lasted minutes, not hours, yet achieved effects sufficient to alter the calculus in Rawalpindi. Pakistani responses included intense shelling and attempted drone incursions, but the deterrence narrative shifted once Indian retaliation proved attritional for terror infrastructure and signaled readiness to continue punishment without breaching India's own escalation thresholds. Crucially, the ceasefire mechanism validates the claim that Pakistan's leadership sought a halt through established military channels. India's Foreign Secretary publicly briefed that Pakistan's DGMO initiated the call. The two sides agreed to stop all operations across domains by a fixed hour, and follow-up DGMO talks were scheduled to review compliance, an acknowledgement of battlefield momentum and diplomatic positioning that undercuts claims that India cannot prosecute conventional operations in a nuclearized setting. Indian ministers have framed Sindoor as measured, focused, and non-escalatory, rejecting suggestions of international pressure or loss of nerve, and reiterating that the action targeted terror capacity, not civilian populations or unrelated military assets. This official characterization aligns with the ceasefire facts, the continuation of pressure options post-ceasefire, and the rapid posture recalibration on the border to manage further risks while retaining coercive leverage. Defense Minister Rajnath Singh and senior veterans have publicly positioned Sindoor as a limited demonstration of capability, a trailer rather than the whole movie, signaling both political will and operational confidence, while reinforcing a doctrine of punitive retaliation bounded by escalation control. These statements complement the government's parliamentary brief that India acted with strategic restraint yet clear intent to dismantle proximate terror threats. Media and think tank analyses since may have converged on the same lesson set. There is exploitable space for limited conventional force under the nuclear umbrella if precision, time compression, target selection, and signaling are synchronized, and if backchannel and hotline instruments are primed to crystallize conflict termination on favorable terms before momentum tips into broader war. This is precisely why Asim Munir's latest catastrophic consequences remark rings hollow to Indian audiences. When tested in 2025, Pakistan's escalatory ladder buckled at the rung of sustained punishment against terror infrastructure, and recourse to DGMO outreach was necessary to arrest further damage, a reality that reveals nuclear rhetoric as a deterrent bluff against limited, disciplined Indian operations calibrated to political aims. On timing, the pattern is unmistakable. Munir's spikes in nuclear signaling recur around periods of internal pressure, and October saw repeated anti-India broadsides, cackle podium lines, diaspora stage boasts, and media amplifications, drawing swift Indian condemnations and restatements of India's right to self-defense and zero tolerance for cross-border terror. India's official posture emphasizes that future actions will be dictated by national security interests, not Pakistani talking points. The spokesperson's statements, ministerial remarks, and parliamentary responses collectively underscore that Delhi rejects external mediation narratives, treats terrorism as the original escalation, and reserves freedom of action within a responsibly managed escalatory envelope. In hard military terms, Sindoor's success rested on 4 pillars: precision weaponry and ISR for target discrimination, compressed strike windows to minimize exposure and miscalculation, cross-domain readiness to parry retaliatory shelling and drones, and rapid political military decision loops that paired firepower with controlled termination via hotlines, producing a ceasefire that recognized the Indian coercive effect while averting a slide into general conflict. Operational messaging mattered. Official briefings highlighted measured aims and de-escalatory intent, even as the armed forces demonstrated reach and accuracy, thereby sustaining international patience and blunting Pakistani attempts to recast the action as indiscriminate. This diplomatic flank guard supported the rapid conflict termination move when Pakistan sought the ceasefire call. Post-ceasefire signals, extending the truce window, scheduling DGMO reviews, and maintaining elevated readiness, communicated resolve without gratuitous escalation, keeping India's deterrent credible while placing the onus on Pakistan to curb cross-border proxies. These steps are the antithesis of the narrative that India cannot operate conventionally under nuclear risk. Veteran commentary and conclave disclosures since October have further reinforced that Indian planners treated nuclear thresholds with rigor while exploiting Pakistan's credibility gap in first use, signaling for limited conventional punishment below strategic thresholds, relying on tempo, precision, and control rather than mass and duration. In sum, the record is straightforward. India struck, Pakistan retaliated, India held escalation control with calibrated punitive action, Pakistan's DGMO called to stop it, and a bilateral ceasefire was locked through direct military channels under international observation, but not external mediation diktat. The coercive outcome rested on Indian initiative and discipline, not on Pakistani deterrence narratives. That is why claims that conventional war won't be a possibility collapse under evidence. Limited conventional operations are not general war, and Sindoor proved they can be executed under a nuclear shadow with political effect and bounded risk, provided target selection, timing, signaling, and termination are tightly integrated. The strategic takeaway for Indian audiences is clear. Nuclear threats are meant to freeze decision-making and deter even limited punitive action. The antidote is precision, tempo, transparency of aims, and credible conflict termination pathways that deny the adversary escalation pretexts while still imposing costs on terror sponsors. When Asim Munir brandishes the nuclear card again, remember the lived sequence of May 2025. A swift Indian strike package, controlled retaliation management, international patience sustained by measured conduct, a Pakistani outreach through the DGMO hotline, and a ceasefire timeline set in hours, not because India lacked options, but because India had already demonstrated them to decisive political effect. India's system has codified this playbook in public messaging: focused, non-escalatory strikes on terror infrastructure, robust border and air defense readiness against retaliatory adventurism, disciplined information operations, and a standing hotline architecture to flip battlefield advantage into diplomatic closure when the adversary seeks the exit ramp. That is the answer to nuclear bluster, not counter-bluster, but repeatable, bounded coercion that changes the adversary's incentives without tripping strategic thresholds. Sindoor executed that, and the documented DGMO call for a ceasefire is the empirical receipt. Rhetoric will continue because it serves domestic politics in Pakistan and seeks to reflate a punctured deterrence narrative internationally. What will matter for India is sustaining readiness, ISR dominance, precision strike capacity, hardened defenses, political clarity, and a confident information line that treats nuclear threats as noise, not vetoes, when responding to terrorism. Indian officials have already drawn the red lines in public: no tolerance for cross-border terror, freedom to act in self-defense, and de-escalation when objectives are achieved. That triad is what denied the adversary both face-saving escalation and the ability to claim that nuclear posture prevented Indian action. So when Munir warns of catastrophic consequences and insists conventional operations are impossible under a nuclear umbrella, the May record answers plainly: India acted, Pakistan absorbed costs, and Pakistan's military sought the ceasefire. That is not a theory, it is the timeline.